I'm Kristina Carroll. Thank you so much for meeting with me today. I'm from Studio SE and the Director of Product Development. Welcome to our discussion for SysML V2, what's new and why do we need it? I would love to introduce this group of people sitting on this wonderful couch next to me. Sandy?
Hi, Christine. I'm Sandy Friedenthal, MBSE consultant, retired from Lockheed some years back and been involved with SysML since its onset.
Thanks.
I'm Ed Seidewitz. I work for Model Driven Solutions. I have worked with Sandy on SysML V2. We were leaders of the SysML V2 submission team together, and now are continuing to work with the systems modeling community. And I'm also in charge of the reference implementation for SysML V2.
And I am Ryan Yourishin. I am an MBSE practitioner, and I work at Sierra Nevada Corporation and currently lead a team of MBSE practitioners at that company.
And I'm Tim Swanson from GE Aerospace, MBSE practitioner as well, but control title holder is a GE term for a fellow in systems engineering and focus on MBSE.
I'm Casey Medina, president of Studio SE. We're dedicated to making sure that our clients and colleagues have exceptional experiences implementing MBSE, and we're very, very fortunate to have these gentlemen with us to help us understand V2 and what's coming up and what we all need to consider.
Hello, I'm Saulius Pavalkis. I'm MBSE Ecosystem Director at Dassault Systems. My responsibility are integrations and my expertise are in simulation integrations and interest in engineering, hardware in the loop, AI. I'm very glad to be here.
Thanks all. So I understand that developing SysML V2 has required a multitude of organizations to get together, and a lot of these people have helped in this effort, and I just want to know what's been your favorite part of the process of this development effort.
Favorite part of the development effort? I would say it's been a very dynamic effort. There's been a lot of really good contributors. As you said, many different organizations. I think we had at various points along the way, we've had upwards of 80 different organizations participating. And a lot of interesting people, a lot of great contributors, and it's been a really interesting project.
In general, I agree with Sandy. The overall project, compared to other projects I've been involved with, and I've been involved with a number of standardization projects, this is far and away the most diverse and the largest group that has put it together. And compared to other large efforts, this group really did work as a team, not as a committee fighting, but as a team working together to get the whole thing done. And that's the basic difference. For myself personally, though, the most fun was I got to code the whole way through. So at this point in my career when I can still code and actually have people out there using what we did I wasn't the only one. Actually had a number of good contributors that we were actually able to put together an implementation that we ended up releasing for like 4 out of the 5 years, just about every month. That was exciting to see that and have people actually using it.
I think one of the most exciting things is that OMG gives the chance to restart, which was already working, which is actually a very big deal. Normally it doesn't happen naturally. But they did with UML 1 and now it's with SysML, which justifies investment of industry and enables 10-time growth. And thanks to actually Sandy for great leadership and OMG for organization process, that creates the top-level environment to make that happen and enable actually future of system engineering.
And as a trainer user, I think what's really interesting to me is how transparent that you all have made this effort. It's very obvious that it was collaboration, and you guys have been very, very good about communicating with all of the user base what's coming, what to think about it, and why it's an interesting evolution of a language that we've all come to use and depend on for product development work.
Yeah, I would agree from a user community and watching some of what your work has been. You know, Sandy's always willing to sit down and talk to people at conferences about the expectations behind what we are going to see, because there's a lot of concerns in industry. for, how do we transition out of what we've already been doing?
And that's kind of a good segue into something I wanted to talk about is really how is SysML V2 going to enhance our ability to define our systems, unlike some of the constrictions or restrictions that we had with SysML V1?
So it goes back to basically the objectives for SysML V2. And, first and foremost, we had SysML V1, and from our experience with V1, there were various limitations that we had, and we wanted to address those in V2. So, our focus with V2 was to improve in various areas, like, for example, to make the language more precise, more regular, more expressive, very importantly, more interoperable, more usable. So many different aspects to improve, and ultimately to help do a better job of MBSE with SysML.
Can you give me, for my own knowledge, an example of some of the things that you just said? Like what's an example of how SysML V2 will do that?
Sure. So taking those individually, for example, let's talk about interoperability. One of the things that SysML V2 includes is a standardized API. We didn't have that in V1. So now we have a standard way to access the model, to interact with the model using the API. So that's a big differentiator. As far as precision, the language is grounded in formal semantics, which we really didn't have in V1. It wasn't built in from the beginning. So we have a much more rigorous foundation. Expressiveness, we've introduced many different aspects. For example, variant modeling concepts and several other kinds of concepts. And, other aspects of the language. So it's more usable, and you can, there's various reasons why it's more usable, primarily because it's so regular. It's a much more regular language, meaning in V1, where you have parts and blocks and actions and activities, in V2 you have parts and part defs and actions and action defs and requirements definitions, and so they follow this very consistent pattern, and it makes it much easier to use.
I'm a language designer, and one of the things about language is we use it to communicate, and there's so much about systems engineering that's about communication. SysML V1 was based on top of Unified Modeling Language, which was designed for software engineers, not systems engineers. Now, there's a huge advantage at the time on building SysML V1 on that and being able to get it out quickly on existing tooling. But really, the underlying capabilities in UML, while they were adapted in SysML V1, were really designed for software engineers, not systems engineers. And it always had an issue as people got more sophisticated with having to work around the different mindset that underneath. So it's not just in V2 that we change the names of things. The regularity is underneath. If you look at how the language is designed and implemented, there's commonality in the semantics and the structure of behaviors of things like actions and parts and requirements and other things, so they fit together better. That wasn't there in V1 because they hadn't thought about it that way coming from UML. So to me, I think that's going to be critical, and it's going to enable a lot more systems engineering specific tooling around a language that is meant to communicate. And you talked about having the sort of open process, and that allowed us to interact along the way with the user community. It's very user driven. And while vendors are finding out now that it's not an easy language to implement, that's because we've made the compromise of saying, yes, this is going to be implementable, but where we can have a better language for the user, we're going to give a little bit more difficulty to the implementer, because once you do that, make that investment, that is then leveraged across the whole user base.
So as a tool vendor, then you're representing from the tool vendor space, how have you found, or what challenges have you faced trying to implement V2?
So a lot of challenges actually, because this is new language, right? And V1 was based on UML, and V2 is based on kernel. But and also, when you do new thing, you always kind of need to like have a lot of resources to do it. So to get those resources, you need to prove that you will get the some value, like bigger value than you have right now. Which is a constant kind of effort to do. But when we think about like UML, when it transitioned to UML2, I was at that moment in company and saw that it was connected methodologies. V1 UML V1 pretty much was connected independent modeling methodologies like activities based on PetriNet, use case methods, state machines, independent methodologies, and then they unified with unified modeling language version 2. So same, and that enabled actually SysML, enabled UAF, enabled all those other things which would be not even be possible before. Now, like with SysML, that's also coming to the same direction. So you learn from your mistakes, and now you see that for example, as a vendor, we can't model requirements in the same way as the rest of the world is modeling. Definition usage, like because requirement needs to be reused in different kind of contexts, in different systems. And now you will be able to do it. And everything is definition and usage. So for us, it's like it makes total sense. But as a vendor, we already have most of those things. Just as a business, I think we understand that this will make 10 times bigger adoption and business. So that's actually what will be like standardization. So that's the biggest challenge from the kind of business side. And from implementation side, so it's pretty much effort to redo everything what we have, and that's a big investment. And the problem also for us is that we support now the largest projects in the world already, millions and tens of millions of elements, the largest MBSE projects. So for us, what shall we do? Continue supporting them or implementing everything? So we are now doing both. Like that's like, also big challenge.
Yeah, certainly from a user side, I'm hoping this allows us to get away from so much reliance on style guides and sort of commonality and that negotiation that you have to have if you're going to integrate with somebody else. So it sounds like some of that might be coming to fruition, that you get that less reliance on a user guide or a style guide that you have to maintain, right? Because again, you got to make sure that you do some enforcement of your style guides as well. Although you get around a lot of that, with validation scripts and things like that, I suppose. But again, if we can rely less on those things and rely on the natural ability to, understand the language, in a much easier way, in simple, streamlined way, then that would be beneficial to us.
I don't know that we'll get away from style guides per se. I think there's a lot more capability for doing model checking to validate that your model is well formed. But as far as style guides, I would say it would be analogous to kind of any project that you have, whether it was software modeling or whether it was writing a document and a proposal. You have to have style guides so that there's a consistency in how you talk about things. So I think we're still going to need those, but I do think the validation checks will be much more rigorous.
But some of the things that organizations need to do to work around some of the issues, every organization tends to put in place, when they get to a certain level of sophistication, they have to put in place how are they going to deal with things like, how are they going to deal with allocation of behavior? Are they going to duplicate the model, or are they going to use some of the specific tooling that Dassault provides to work around it that might not be interoperable with other tooling? At that level, where you're coming up with conventions to work around some of the issues with the language before, which novice users don't see as a problem, but power users see, and then you get different ways to resolve that in different organizations. That's the kind of unification with V2 is, all right, let's look at these problems that people are having and come up with a community solution in the language. But you're right, you're still going to have various organizations wanting to use, they're naturally wanting to say, all right, we're going to use this subset or use it in this way. And that's okay. One of the things we do have is I think a more powerful way to come up with domain-specific variants, even organization variants, more powerful than the profiling mechanism, solving some of the problems, and actually allowing for interoperability. So if you have a way of doing it, and you define your own library of of your specific elements, process, you might be able to interchange that. Well, it was very hard to interchange profiles in the past for various reasons.
A question I have from that, so we have product line engineering defining product variants, and Dassault offers a tool right now or a plugin for that. How is SysML V2 going to make that easier?
A couple of ways. I mean, first of all, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have some core concepts for modeling variability. So we have concepts such as variant and variation, and we have the ability to model variability constraints. So we have these core concepts that you need to model variation that supports product line engineering. And the second thing is we have the API. So product line engineering environment has to cross many tools. It's not just in the SysML model, it'd be in your CAD model, your analysis models, all the different kinds of models. So having the standardized API will facilitate that interoperability across the different models and tools. So you'll hopefully be able to take the variability as defined at sort of the architectural level and then access that and then carry that down to the more detailed design in your electrical, mechanical, CAD, etc.
What he said.
Yeah.
Excellent. One thing as a training provider that we're really looking forward to is the enhancement and the formality of the syntax. So what we find is because of how V1 is written and because there's this lack of I shouldn't say lack of formality, there's less formality in V1, that we find these style guides are different from entity to entity. And it becomes more difficult to make these interoperable. And so definitely from our side, having a more consistent syntax, more consistent definition of that syntax will make it easier for us to be able to engage with our clients. And so I'd be interested to know how that works now and how will that be an enhancement in V2 for practitioners?
I would say I think it definitely will be, and sometimes seen with V2 and how the OMG or Object Management Group is going with the new standard is the system modeling community. There's this whole other aspect of what's going on behind the scenes of the standard itself. So with the semantics and things like that we can conform to, there's also like the implementation working group that is coming along, right? So there will be agreed upon, not prescriptive, it sounds like, examples of how you might be able to implement this stuff and things. And then like the conformance things where you can actually go and do semantic checks. So some of those underlying things where it's been the Wild West with V1 up to this point, I think that's where a lot of these issues are kind of being solved or addressed with V2.
Yeah, certainly from my perspective, I think that's, anything that can help that communication is going to be great. We see a lot of variability, and then if we work projects and programs with multiple prime integrators, we tend to have to deal with some insistence upon styles that are slightly different, and so which affects reuse for us. And so anything that can help get that through, and it sounds like SysML's got, again, more straightforward, maybe usage in that sense, that the interfacing information might be easier to, get off that day one. Okay, we're going to sit down and go through the style guide, and we're going to enforce a style guide upon, and we get that enforced upon us from prime integrating airframes and as well as the government. And so, if that's going to become easier with V2, that'll be much appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, and we do have an opportunity. I mean, nothing's going to happen by itself, and the language doesn't fix everything. It's not a by any means. You need an overall approach to this. So we got to take advantage of this opportunity. And so one of the examples that we were talking about is establishing consistent modeling patterns that people can use. They may have if they have a reason to use a different one, they use it. But if they don't, use this. And so, as Ed mentioned, we just recently stood up in the OMG this organizational construct called a managed community, and specifically a systems modeling community. And that community is going to be working, that'll be a primary focus, is to begin to establish modeling patterns and things of that sort. Many other aspects as well, but that's one thing that this community is going to focus on. And hopefully we can, get those out there and make them, in effect, part of the standard. So we'll see.
Very cool.
Could I give you a more technical answer? Sure. Your specific point on syntax. As a language designer, one of our intents was to put together the specification for SysML V2 using some of the experience of the last 50 or more years with designing artificial languages and programming languages. And that hasn't always been applied in design modeling languages. Now, modeling languages aren't programming languages, but when you're defining at the syntactic level and trying to formalize it, you can bring in a lot of the same techniques. So I think much more than other modeling language standards, we try to bring that in, and including the textual notation, which has turned out to be much more popular even with the systems engineering community than I realized it would be, or I thought it would be. But what that does is allow the capability to tie into a whole ecosystem of tooling that's out there, that's developed over many years for dealing with the textual syntax of programming languages. And it allows us to reconnect into a community that to some extent gave up after UML with the modeling community. And I think that's important for the future in system engineering, where we really do need to connect the systems engineering and software engineering communities for the next generation of cyber physical systems.
And just point of clarification, Ed we didn't really bring this up, but Ed mentioned the textual notation. He was just talking about it, but there's also graphical notation, and we have both textual and graphical, and they're complementary.
And we formally define the graphical notation
as well,
which is innovative.
Yeah. So you have both available. You as a modeler will have both the graphical notation and the corresponding textual notation available to you.
That's actually really, really exciting. I can see a lot of potential possibilities for that, for automation, and with some of the dare I say AI on the horizon, it feels like that might be an interesting way to approach some elements of model definition with some of these new technologies and things like that. Is that something that you considered as you were developing the text base, or what was the motivation behind the text base piece of that?
To be honest, the motivation, we had done text-based notation for the action language for foundational UML, which is an OMG standard. But one of the reasons we started with textual notation was that we had made a commitment to have this process of actually developing as we went and having really an agile approach to interacting with the community as we built the language. Well, a lot of the tooling out there to do languages agilely and quickly, and there is a lot of tooling for it available, it's all based on textual notation. Now, in the time since we started, there actually are more capabilities to do graphical languages, but the reality is to quickly stand up a language and be able to start demonstrating it, it's much easier to do it with existing tooling if it's a textual language. Our intent had always been to do both textual and graphical, but that was one of the reasons we started with the textual notation, and then we were able to integrate it with other tooling such as Jupyter Notebook, which we have one deployment, which is a notebook for scientific and engineering computation that is based around textual language. We were able to integrate right into that. JPL suggested we do that, and we were able to integrate right in, which allowed it to be used much more widely, much more quickly. So it was really a matter of being able to, as I said, integrate into that ecosystem that already existed, while still pursuing the visualization and ultimately editing capability with a graphical notation, just like we had with V1.
And a comment on that would be that the initial textual notation wasn't overly intuitive in the early versions of it, but as we used it and provided the feedback,
Yeah.
we ended up with a very intuitive textual notation. So it shouldn't scare a non-software oriented systems engineer. They should be able to look at it and go, I get that. That's pretty straightforward. I've had people pick up the textual notation and just say, what does that say? And they can interpret it with no instruction.
Yeah.
Now, there are caveats to that. It's not that straightforward, but a lot of it actually is. And then with a little bit of training and you learn a few symbols, a few critical symbols, then you're well on your way to starting to understand the textual notation. It's just very complementary with the graphical. Some things are better suited to looking at it textually, and some things are better suited to looking at it graphically.
And the reality is, even the graphical notation in V1 had a lot of text on it too, right? You had
That's
labels and on state machines, right? You had descriptions of the actions and things, the triggers and things that happen. What we've ended up with is, with a good deal of regularity, that it is now those little textual annotations on the graphical are the same notation as the textual notation, which means you can go back and forth. You can start textually and then turn more and more graphical, or you can start graphically and start annotating with text and then go more and more textual. And that, as you said, allows you to go back and forth very naturally between the notations. All we need is the tooling that Saulius is working on.
R&D, I'm not part, but yeah, they are. I have a question actually. Don't you think that this textual notation will actually enable the future type of systems which are more and more rich on software?
I think if we work it right, it will allow us to work more closely with the software community. I'm hoping it will help also reintroduce some of the successes we've had with modeling back to a software community that turned away from that 20 years ago, I think to its detriment. And I think we have an opportunity here to both benefit systems and benefit software development. But really, the fact is that they're so intertwined in the future. Every system is heavily a software system now.
Yes.
But you need that systems engineering viewpoint, and that systems viewpoint, you need some modeling capability, even when a large part of your system is software. So yeah, I think there's a real opportunity there. Hoping.
I'd like to understand a little bit more. We've talked about it, but the reusability between V1 and V2, and I know I'm a model builder and we have some model users and model builders here. Can we go back and forth between V1 and V2 with our current models? If we build a model in V2, can we view it in V1? How might that work?
So,
have you thought about this, Sandy?
I figured.
Yeah, we kind of thought about this. So, we, as part of the V2 SysML V2 specification development, we developed what we call a transformation specification. So basically, what that does is if you have a conformant SysML V1 model, you can apply this transformation spec that gets implemented by the vendors, and then they should be able to transform the V1 model into a V2 model, a conformant V2 model. So there is no explicit reuse direct between a V1 model and V2 model, but you can transform the V1 model into a V2 model and then model in V2. Now, we don't have the capability to go in reverse. There's a lot of capabilities. We looked at approaches to doing that. We didn't do that. So once you move it from V1 to V2, it's in V2, and that's going to be your environment. But this is an area we're going to have to come to grips with, because there will be V1 models out there for many years, and we'll be introducing V2 models, and they are going to need to interoperate. And so we're going to have to develop approaches to that. And we have, various ideas on how to do that. A lot of it's going to be dependent on the vendors and their ability to provide a mixed environment. In fact, I'd be curious to hear from Saulius about that.
So, kind of when you see how long are those projects, some serious projects, they are like tens of years, right? You need to keep the data. So, like Sandy said, likely they will still stay for some time in V1, right? And another aspect is that, like if you did the model, like you want to maybe redo it if it is next generation of your system, not like re-import and just stay the same, but definitely kind of libraries, migrations, and other stuff which are like reusable would make sense, I think, right? And we had migration between UML 1 and UML 2, so it was quite different languages, right?
Yeah.
So that's, yeah, the biggest value is actually to be able to do the system in SysML 2, not to migrate the old. But yeah.
I got to say that that's one of our biggest concerns from an industry standpoint is what is going to be the cost of that transformation. Again, our projects are tens of years, and we have re-engineering programs on the B52 that's now 50 plus years old, right? Again, so you potentially have these systems, specifications, systems models that are going to persist for some time, right? Our products are really long life cycle. So if we've invested on creating a model that's accurate, hopefully it is compliant to SysML, and I'll say that we've struggled a little bit with that as well. So, so kind of keyed off of that when you said it, and I'm like, okay, as long as we're rigorous about making sure that our models are compliant, that is the first thing, maybe in ensuring that it's not going to be so arduous if we, if we convert it to V2.
Yeah.
I appreciate the fact. Go ahead. I'll go second.
Okay, I was just going to say that one of the differences here from UML 1 to UML 2, so people had used UML 1 5, maybe 6 years before we went to UML 2. The time span, and UML was new, and it took a few years between when it was adopted. It was really not until 1.3 that people really were starting to use UML. SysML V1 has been available. It was, I think, 12 years when we started. So, it's going on.
It's 2007, 7 is when it was
adopted. So you're talking 15 years or more of use of V1 with a lot of success. So there's a lot invested in it. So it's a bigger deal. But the reality is we're looking at that much more than I've seen in other standardization efforts of how to make that migration. But, some of the issue is it's not going to all be standardized, because not everybody is fully compliant with V1, because of the problems they have to work around and having different solutions. So some of it is going to be building up a market of tooling that allows people to adapt and do the migration and interoperability that they need. And there are a lot of people thinking about this, and I think that's very healthy. I think we're going to see a healthy tooling market to support what people need to do. And it may not come out of the standardization side beyond what we've already done, but I think it'll come out of the marketplace to support what is going to be a major market.
What tools and resources?
Did you want to say something?
No, I will go. Because I really appreciate the fact that transformation was a thought with all this. And so from like a practitioner perspective and being heavily invested in 1.0, right? There has been an insane amount of effort and work put into creating style guides, creating process around that. So, and then having decade-old customers that have implemented it, huge models. So the transformation, you guys with kernel and UML, you've kind of identified, okay, what are the important pieces that work between the two? So even having that as an option is so big to be able to have that opportunity to move forward for those customers that want to, because we're customer driven. So I foresee that a lot of customers are going to stick with 1.7 because if it's not broke, why fix it kind of thing, right? But then what we can do with the transformation guide is we can understand, as we're currently developing libraries and those things, how can we build for the future? So maybe focus on those areas that will go and be able to prioritize our time on things that might not work with that transformation, knowing that this is where we're going as a discipline.
Yeah, and I would reinforce that. Not every program. I mean, if you have a long program, it's a SysML V1 program. You're not necessarily going to go to V2. Or if you do, it may be when there's a major upgrade, you may make that decision, oh, strategically, this is the time to do it. So just because we have V2 doesn't necessarily mean instantly everybody's going to go to V2. It will be a transition, and you should, need to think through the strategy as if to transition, I mean, on a particular program, and when and how, and it needs to be thought through. And I mean, we went through this early on with MBSE in the first place, just moving from, into MBSE, and we had to go through this whole thing. Should we start doing model-based? So we've all experienced that over many years. It's going to continue to be a challenge, but it just needs to be dealt with strategically within an organization, and putting in place the right practices and having the right transition plans and what have you, and making those decisions based on what's the benefit we're going to get versus what's it going to cost us.
One of the things that we believe is that a system is nothing more than the physical embodiment of a process. And so as we start to engage with our clients and even internally, we look at developing the process that's or modifying the process where one exists to think about how it works with or is enabled by V2. And so I think a lot of organizations forget that they can't actually use SysML to model their organization and their development processes. And in doing that, we get experience with V2 without having to learn it on a new program for a customer. So we're actually improving ourselves, we're learning, we're getting that experience. And then as we have those processes in place, we have some experience with it, we can start to roll it out on programs a lot easier. And then we have everything in that V2 mindset. And that's how we work with a lot of our clients whenever they're making any change. And I feel like this might be a great way to approach that with V2 as well.
Yeah, we do a lot of process modeling, for better or for worse, right? In our models to assist in how the understanding of how you actually want to build the model that's associated with the process. So if that is a good way to kind of dip your toe maybe into the V2, maybe that, I agree.
Yeah, also just so you're aware of it, within DoD, the Office of Digital Engineering, Modeling and Simulation under Daniel Hedema, he has had a project underway for the last year, and the purpose of that project is to develop transition guidance. So there's actually a nice body of information, there's a wiki and the whole thing, that provides a good starting point to help organizations in this transition.
Yeah, and that certainly will be helpful. And I've talked to Daniel Hedema quite a bit, because it comes back to we do what our customers ask us to do.
Yep.
Right.
Good idea.
So it's usually a pretty good idea to do as our customers desire, right? And so that flows down to us, and I appreciate the work that he's been doing in trying to drive that consistency across, our big customers in the DoD for sure. And I hopefully you're feeling some of that consistency as well.
Yeah, I know some of what concerns us and a lot of our clients is we see the value in it. That what are some of those things as we look to adopting it that we want to make sure that we keep in mind so that we're successful and that we're forward thinking about what V2 is and what its capabilities are, so that as we work through these new programs or process development or whatever it happens to be, that we go into it with our eyes wide open, ready to accept it and use it to its fullest potential as we get that maturity in the organization.
Yeah, and as we were talking about briefly before, setting up, having strategy, right? Really important to think this thing through because it is a big change. And so taking advantage of your existing organizational improvement efforts, usually, a lot of the organizations have MBSE initiatives, they have digital engineering initiatives, etc. So bringing this into that and then thinking through the strategy of recognizing that there that it is a big impact. So how are you going to go about it? So for example, under putting in place some pilot projects, early pilots. I mean, when I was at Lockheed and we started the MBSE effort, first thing we did was start with some pilot activities, and we started getting familiar with the capability, and then we targeted those pilots to new programs, pre-proposal efforts, and then we had an established team that knew, based on the pilot work, that had some experience, and we validated some of our practices and the like, and then we carried that forward on the program, and it worked. We got through on that program, and then we took that team and what we learned from that, and we carried it over to another program. And so, there's no real shortcuts to this. You're going to have to think it through and do the work and evolve your capability over time. So I think just starting the process, as Ed said, with this pilot implementation we now refer to as a reference implementation, folks, even in advance of the tool vendors coming out with tools, which we will see are coming shortly, in advance of that, we have an open source reference implementation that people can start to use, get familiar with the capabilities, start to understand the impacts on their practices, and start seeing where the value is and what the changes are and the whole thing. So just be strategic about it.
Very cool. We have a lot of folks that think you can just kind of walk in on a Monday morning and flip a switch, and all of a sudden the whole organization's MBSE.
Nope.
And I'm curious how
It takes at least a week.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. For sure.
Yeah.
And so how are our industry partners and users thinking about that transition? Do you guys getting the sense that it's kind of a flip the switch thing, or is it like we're planning this? Is it kind of not on the horizon? How does that look as practitioners?
You want to go first?
I can go first. So I would say I'm not terrified, but I'm very curious how it will go, because 1.0 it is such an investment, and to work through it at a company and get those early adopters and then get it adopted, and now convincing all the laggards, as I've heard them referred to, it's a real challenge, right? And we're currently going through it. So this hasn't even been something we've solved yet. So once customers do start asking for .2, it's almost like going through that again. Is the concern there? 2.0. Yes, 2.0. So that's my biggest concern, is then having all these people that put in a significant amount of effort into learning 1.0. Now we got to do it again. And I understand there's a lot of similarities, but there's also going to be a lot of learning there. And it turns out in some industries, people have been doing things the same way for a long time. And when you throw a new tool or a new process at them, if what was working for them before was suitable, it's hard to spend that time to learn something new. So that's the concern I have now. But I will caveat that with, I think this is the way things are going, and I think it's going to lead to the open system, the easier integration, but we've got to put in that legwork to get there.
Saul.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think that we know it's not going to be a flip the switch, right? I mean, I think that we've learned that from what we've done thus far in the current version. We're prepared for that. I think that, the upside is of when you're doing that, we not only digitize our process, but we actually look at it from a lean perspective. Can we take steps out using this methodology as well? So the direct digitization, we take the opportunity to then improve what we do and complement what the capability of the tool is. And if V2 is, as advertised, I'll say, and provides that more straightforward view, especially for the mechanical side designers, I can already see the value in that. As we talk, parts versus blocks, right? And love to have that another round of complete process improvement around that. So that's kind of the upside.
For sure.
I think that from our leadership perspective, they're going to see, oh no, I need to retrain everybody. And so, again, I think strategy and plan you have to have going into those conversations and say, this is the benefit we're going to get out of it.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And you'll have to demonstrate that. And again, start small, do it incrementally. And it is a big step, and those are legitimate concerns. But in the long run, the reason we pursued this is that we felt that V1 was really kind of fundamentally couldn't stay ahead of the trend of the evolving system complexity. Realistically, I mean, if you really think about it, it's just fundamentally had some limitations. We weren't going to get there. I think V2 has the opportunity to scale. And I personally, my own personal conviction is that V1, in my experience, was that V1 would not be able to scale with the complexity of the systems that not only today's, but as we go forward. So, it's like you're not throwing away your investment. You can bring it forward, but it's not free. You're going to have to make the organizational investment. Hopefully the programs get it back. And that's the thing. That's where the cost benefit is. I mean, if each program had to do this, forget it. But if an organization makes the proper investment, then their programs will get the benefit. So,
Makes sense.
I was just going to say that's a nice part of being customer driven too, is that we don't have to do a hard sell on it. It's just going to be required.
Right.
So
I have a quick question for Saul with that, because we're saying, maybe we don't make a transition to V2. There might be hesitation. We're going to maintain models in V1. Is there a possibility from the tool vendor side that there comes a point when we say we're no longer supporting V1?
It is possibility, but likely will be supported for some time. It's actually depends on the usage. We always look at the usage aspect. So at some moment it might be like really worth to kind of transition and see like how can we do it easier, to not to do both, right? But like even right now, when you look at the tool, it's kind of designed to support both from the early stage what we have. But
Once Saulius retires, there's no point in carrying on V1.
Yeah. Big question from Dassault. We don't have to record this. Am I going to have to buy a Cameo license for V1 and V2, or are they going to be combined in one?
That's a great question.
it's a different question, It's always, discussion. It's always discussion, but it's we don't go that path that you buy a lot of like small things, not like small thing here, right? But like it's better to stick to bigger package.
I think it's fair to say, it's okay to say, because you demonstrate the tool can support both.
Yeah, it could support
The
both,
one tool
right?
can
So
support both V1 and V2 in one tool.
Yeah.
So I was presuming maybe one license, but I guess
At least current point of view is that more than like kind of like to have like single thing. Not talking specifically about V2, but in general, for example, Data Hub is included and other things are included. But that doesn't mean that we can't create new products on implementation of V2 or V1. That could be separate thing as a new product for new area, which would compete in the market. That could be like separate license likely, but like V2 is likely the same kind of base on which you want to build. So it's not like really optional. It's like one like must thing, right?
Yeah, it would probably make sense to not upcharge too much, at least initially, to encourage people your customers to move in that direction.
I mean, because they'll offer V1 licenses without V2, but if you get V2, you want them to also
Have
have
V1.
V1.
Yeah, it's as an enabler. It is
a good
V2 or will be. That's definitely the best effort to have it. Especially if you invest in implementation, so you want to that industry would adopt. And I kind of agree with Sandy. I think most of people would agree that it's like an enabler for actual DoD and other strategies of digital engineering. which is like standard itself, unification, but also the interfaces and textual notation, which enables other things, not necessarily SysML itself.
Mm-hmm.
I just, no, that's fine. I just wanted to, as I was thinking you were asking about other topics, I wanted to elaborate a little bit on the point I made before about individual organizations and user communities extending the language in a way that was difficult, but still done a lot with profiles in V1. V2 is built on a library-based approach, very fundamentally, which is something we've been talking about it as a new language and how its language capabilities are like V1, and that's all very appropriate. But V2, the syntax, is really a shorthand for pulling capabilities from the library. And the library is fundamentally a semantic ontology. To use another buzzword, we have to get more buzzwords.
Buzzword bingo.
But that is written in SysML V2 also, or underneath in the kernel modeling language, but it's written in the programming language. So for a SysML V2 user organization, if they want to extend it, well, you can extend V2 in much the same way with capabilities in V2 that V2 is an extension of kernel. You can build your own organization-specific languages, and you can build domain-specific languages on top of the general language, and your definition of that, the semantics behind it, is written in SysML V2, so you can interchange that just like you interchange your other models. That's what the point I was making before, is that you can get that level of interoperability. So even if you've specialized in your organization, if you need to interchange with another organization, or you need to deal with subcontractors, you can say, oh, by the way, for our special profile, here's the SysML V2 model that defines what that means. So now you can plug it in to your SysML V2 tool, and suddenly it is now adapted for using with your organization. And that's going to be very powerful at the organization level, but also at the community level. We're already seeing the folks that are doing AADL, which is an architecture description language, that some was considered in competition to V1. And they're looking to base that as a domain-specific language on top of V2 now. I've been looking with Siemens about the interoperability with Capella and Arcadia, which was also another competitor. It looks like we could interoperate by having a interoperability profile on V2 that adapts it to Capella. So it's a very powerful approach, both for specific organizations and also for integrating to other language communities in a similar way.
Yeah, this certainly will be helpful to us. Interoperability is probably one of the biggest things that has been discussed lately, right? That how do you interoperate, and if you have a different tool, and I want to work with, we're okay putting our jet engines into whatever application, right? For the most part, and so it opens up a good way to communicate with our existing models, hopefully, and reuse.
And it's sort of by externalizing the semantics. I mean, we've learned that from the programming language community, which has moved to a very library-based kind of approach, where we have more of an advantage is, as a modeling language, we can put a lot more information into that. And the idea being that now you don't need to rewrite your tool in order to extend it. You can use the same language that you're using for modeling your system to also consider the language to be a system and extend the language with a system model. Anyway, that was the point I wanted to make.
No, that's fantastic. That's a really interesting concept, actually. I really appreciate that. That's interesting to...
There's a long... I have a presentation. It's called... I am the very model of a modern meta-modeler. But it could be called 3,000 Years of Meta-Modeling, because the term meta goes back to Aristotle, actually. Or actually it goes back to people who are categorizing Aristotle's work. And there's a long history leading up to what we're trying to do in V2 that I think is now being applied in a very innovative way. There are a number of people here who have worked on that and contributed to that. A lot of the users don't see that. That's sort of in the infrastructure behind the scenes, but they're going to see the benefit of it.
V2, Aristotle all the way up to V2.
All the way up to V2.
That's fantastic.
You know what
Interesting
meta,
lineage.
You know what
Yeah.
meta means in Greek? After. So this is V2 is meta because it's after V1.
Does anyone else have anything that they want to capture or get out of this conversation?
Yeah, we appreciate all of you guys. I mean, it's interesting. It's relevant. This is, every once in a while we get to be a part of, or at least witness something that is kind of groundbreaking, earth-shattering in a particular industry and maybe bigger than that. And I feel like this is one of those moments. And I think it's an exciting time to be a systems engineer, and we really appreciate everybody sharing their expertise and knowledge and looking to the future for that. So thank you all very, very much.
Certainly
Thank
great
you.
to sit
Thank
down with
you.
some legends over
Thank
here.
Yeah.
Of SysML and people, you know,
Don't forget Saul in the
infamous
corner.
or famous like Saul. But
Yeah.
Actually, very good to have good clients, who actually apply and practice the deep expertise of system engineering into the model-based system engineering, which is actually a big deal. But also, I would want to say that it's actually a big thank you to R&D, who is actually under big pressure to make things work, which is actually, I think, the lion's part. Like Sandy and Ed, is actually language experts. They are implementation experts, which is like lifetime career to be expert, like 30 years, 20 years, and they feel that pressure from multiple directions to support current users and future users, and they need our help also, to pick that as a priority instead of anything else. So if you can, always they will say thank you, And some of them are here, like Nereus and
Very
Thomas.
talented group of folks.
Very, very talented.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.
thanks.
Okay.